Thanks very much. A couple of meetings ago we had Rick Seeger give us a talk about formation flying, and very interesting. I'm sure everybody enjoyed it. And he finished up with a presentation of a film coverage, I think it was Channel 9, of a Sydney show 2 days before the show, and they put a cameraman in number 2 aircraft. Number 1's in the front, number 2's on the left, number 3's on the right, and number 4 comes up from behind to join into the formation. And he was going too fast, and he popped a speed brake and it moved upwards, broke the nose off one aircraft, the wing off the other aircraft. Fortunately no one got injured. One did a wheels up landing, one did an injection. But I immediately thought, I remember seeing something like that happen before. I was 8 years of age, was at the Farnborough Air Display in the UK. My father always used to take me along to the shows, and normally we would get there nice and early to get a good view of the show. Farnborough Air Show started, as you can see, very early on, pre-First World War, and was always a state-of-the-art air show for equipment that was built in the UK, built in England. No one else was in fact allowed to have any aircraft displayed until quite late on, and we'll get to that eventually. But as you can see, 1925, the Autogyro, a bit before the helicopter time. 1949, there's the Comet, and you'll notice the square windows and the infamous story about what happened to the Comet. Get to 1955, there's the Flying Bedstead, which was the original concept of the Harrier jump jet. Even 1962 is the Concorde. So then 1998, and even in 76, so what's that? Nearly 40 years ago, we had the UAVs, which are quite common practice now, but I was quite surprised when I saw it 40 years ago. And then of course you always have the standard formation flying and the fabulous red arrows. And even recently is the UAVs. So post World War II, the British aircraft industry, there was something like 20 different firms manufacturing aircraft. They were all relatively small firms, but there was a fantastic collection of aviation that was available to the British. They were by far the world leaders, and it was only up until quite recently that they allowed other nations to promote their aircraft, and when they started to realise that they produced the Comet and the bits and pieces, but they couldn't supply the aircraft in sufficient numbers from the small factories, so that's when they all started to amalgamate, and then of course things started to go backwards pretty rapidly. But in those days, in 1952, as I say, I went to the Farnborough Air Display, and I was born in September 43, so I was about 8.5 years of age. And it's one of my first, most vivid recollections. My father would take us down there. We get there early, and there was a hill up on the left-hand side, and the idea was that we go up on the left-hand side to have a good view of the air show. And I think it was 4 days, if I remember correctly, and the average attendance, as you can see there, was in excess of 130,000. And of course, in those days, if the aircraft didn't go through the sound barrier, then it was the wettest piece air show. It was the standard procedure. The rules and regulations were absolutely pathetic. There weren't any. They were low level, flying over the crowd, etc., etc. And they had to come through go through the sound barrier. And John Derry was in a DH110 twin boom machine. The first photograph you saw, this one here, which was, as I say, the prototype for the Royal Navy Sea Vixen. And he came screaming past on the left-hand side. Oh, we didn't get, my father, for some reason we were delayed, what they call a traffic jam or whatever the case may be. We didn't get there early enough to get up on the hill on the left-hand side, so we're in the middle of the airfield. Pretty well, about as far away from the blinds as I am from the edge of the airfield itself. And so the DH110 comes screaming across from the left-hand side, goes to the sound barrier, kaboom! Everybody grins and all, that wasn't too bad. And up he climbs up to about 40,000 feet, turns around and comes back again with the intention to go through another sound barrier. But as I subsequently found out reading the DCA investigation, there was a slight failure in the leading edge, and it immediately started to peel as he reached the speed of sound, and it made the aircraft pitch up and it pulled 13G, in which case obviously the fuselage couldn't hold anything together. The pilots was John Derry, co-pilot was Tony Richards, both were very experienced test pilots. And when I was researching all this information, the test pilots were like racing car drivers. Everybody knew their names. They were quite famous. And from 1946 to 1952, 76 test pilots died. So, just incredible numbers. Anyway, so there am I watching this aircraft, and it comes back and it gets up to about this position, and it suddenly stopped. And then it started to break up, disintegrate, and it came down like a leaf. And I can remember looking at the fluttering bits, and 2 black dots went on, and fluttering bits, 2 black dots, fluttering bit, 2 black dots, and my sight was going backwards and forwards one to the other. And the 2 engines, one went up relatively high, the other one low. The higher one went over the hill where there was cars and parked at the back, and the one in front slammed into the hill. We didn't realise what was going on. So we took off. I remember taking my eyes away from that and watching the rest of it flutter down in front of me. And sure enough, John Derry, who was the first time, was the first British pilot to go through the sound barrier in 1948, his headless body was visible in front of us. I didn't see the other guy's body, but I could certainly see the body of one of the pilots, and when I later found out it was John Derry. I didn't think much about this, and it was just bits and pieces lay around in front of us. And what we didn't realise, and obviously we soon found out, was that the 2 engines slammed into where I would have been standing with my parents, and 29 people got killed. So it was a fairly gruesome effort, and we were standing there, and it was absolute silence. I mean, you could hear the ambulances, but nothing else. And this was happening, I suppose, about to the far side of the runway. That's about as far as it was from where I was when it was going on. 63 were injured, and say 29 died. And then the sound was broken, or the silence was broken eventually by Neville Duke in a Civil Marine Swift that was taxiing out. And once again, there was no comments amongst any of the spectators, but we watched him taxi out, and he immediately took off, climbed to 40,000 feet, turned around and went through the sound barrier. No, it's quite, as I say, it was Rick Seeger's presentation a couple of meetings ago that really brought it back to my thoughts. And having investigated all the bits and pieces of accident investigations and goodness knows what, the newspaper articles, the TV coverage, and you'll see shortly a Pathé News thing. Believe it or not, that's yours truly. But I eventually got to personal recollections, and I started to read this one, and where did I put that pad down? And this was a report to Farnborough Air Show in 1952, and it's a report by a gentleman named Colin Sutherland. I thought that sounded vaguely familiar. In August, this is his words, in August 1952, I started learning to fly at Red Hill Airfield, having gained a flying scholarship through the RAF section of the Combined Cadet Force at Emmanuel School. My parents were on holiday at Kent, so I rode my bike there from my home at Wandsworth Common, London. I couldn't believe this because I won a RAF flying scholarship from the Combined Cadet Force, from Emmanuel School, and I grew up in Wandsworth Common. So I don't believe this, so I quickly went back to my OE register, Old Emmanuel register, and sure enough, there was his name. So I sent him off an email, and half an hour later got a reply back, we're going to catch up together next year. It turned out that he was at school about 6 or 7 years before me. He was there from 46 to 52, and I was there from 53 up to 1960. And his RAF flying scholarship, he was of an era before me, so it was national service in those days, so you had to do 2 years in the army regardless. And when the RAF said, yeah, you can have a commission, you can learn to fly, but you have to do 4 years, he said, no thanks, I'm not interested in that. And so he finished up being a bin counter. But anyway, I continued on, and I applied to join the RAF when I was old enough, but they knocked me back. Now, one of the reasons may well be, if you're observant, you'll see this young boy, that's me when I was about 15 years of age, I think, with the end of a propeller, because I didn't have a very good effort at landing that time off on my pilot's course. I landed at a 50 foot and it stalled in. But anyway, eventually, years later, I finished up in Australia, and I was actually accepted to the RAF at 25 years of age, and there I am, graduating on a Mackie. But anyway, if we can show this movie now, that basically is the story as I recall, which was all brought about by Rick Seeger's effort with a modern day air show. What we're going to look at now is a BBC film clip or news clip, which is about 3 or 4 minutes long.
At the Farnborough Air Show in 1952, people turned out in vast numbers to see all these new aircraft daringly displayed by the test pilots. One of the big draws that year was John Derry, who would be flying the extraordinary twin-boom DH-110. And amongst the crowds on the Saturday was the 5-year-old Richard Gardner.
The 1952 air show is one that I'll never forget, because although I was very young at the time, my father was taking a cine film and I was standing next to him, and we had the sunshine roof open of our old car. He was following with the 16mm cine camera, the DH-110.
You have this extremely beautiful, if curious looking plane, flown by John Derry.
This aircraft approached at very high speed from my right and banked over, and it looked sort of glistening, silver-coloured aircraft.
723, starting to accelerate now, coming up to the speed of sound now, passing it now.
Derry broke the sound barrier, flung the plane higher and higher. Then the unexpected, the unbelievable happened. The plane broke up.
My mother sort of grabbed my father's elbow and said, "Look, look, look, something's happening." The father shouted back, "No, let go, leave me alone, leave me alone."
Derry's DH-110 came apart in mid-air, right above the watching thousands.
I'll never forget, it looked like confetti, it looked like silver confetti. The remaining airframe floated down right in front of us, and it just came down, like a leaf.
Both Derry and his co-pilot, Tony Richards, were killed.
And then the two engines, like two missiles, shot out of the airframe and hurtled in the direction of the air show.
One of them smashed into a hill where thousands were standing.
There was sort of silence, and then one or two people screamed. But mostly it was just a sort of shock. You could hear some people were sort of whimpering, which was quite shocking if you were a young person who were not used to that sort of thing. Grown people sort of crying.
It was carnage. 28 spectators had been killed, and countless more injured.
This was an absolutely nakedly public event. It took place in front of hundreds of thousands of people. They could see suddenly that it wasn't all about abstract glamour or excitement. It was about a man dying in front of them in the air. And it was also about a lot of spectators dying. They were not just onlookers, they were tragic participants.
Derry's crash had also been witnessed by other test pilots on the ground, waiting for their part of the display.
I think everybody almost felt a personal loss with John Derry being killed by that accident.
But once the ambulance crews had treated the injured and the wreckage cleared away,
they went on with the air show. Can you imagine anything like that today, if something like that happened? 28 people. Neville Duke in a Hawker Hunter took off, flew the plane up to 30,000 feet, dived it and broke the sound barrier. Now, was that a kind of a brutal act or an unthinking act? No, I think what they realised was they had to keep the show on the road.
The air show was such an important event. It was in the spirit of things to carry on.
And the next day, in the pouring rain, 140,000 people turned up to watch the final day's display.
The difference between then and now is that it never crossed anybody's mind to sue either Farnborough, the airfield organisers, or de Havilland's, the company that made the plane.
Changes, though, were made to what test pilots would be allowed to do in the future.
Besides an immediate effect, it had a lasting effect on flying, because we were not allowed after that to do turns towards the crowd.